Hello and welcome to a new episode on the second ring beyond the ice walls. This is the 8th episode of the series and I'm finally back after a 2-month pause, which was very unfortunately brought on by me getting basically a disease on my lungs, which caused me to not be able to talk without coughing for a long while, and still, even now, I still have some of the effects remaining, but that doesn't matter because today we will finally continue the series where we last left off. So for newcomers, let's just get on what we're doing. This is the model that shows the Earth seen in this way, where there are rings that go around what we know as Earth, aka the 7th or 6th continents, depending on which model you prefer, and then Antarctica is divided into these gates that actually are able to be accessed and you can finally find the lands beyond the ice walls. But that was the purpose of the original series for which these episodes were made for. Then now we're exploring what is even after the second ring beyond the ice walls, which is the mountain ring, as written right here, and the continents that are existing between this mountain ring and the wastes at the end of the world. So in the past episodes, we have started all the way from here after exploring the entirety of the second ring and going all the way here, and we explored one by one all of these continents, learning all about them, but Valhalla, Asgard, Nubis, Sky Caverns, Refugia, Oracula, about these wastes, the Titanic Forest, the Walls of Asgard, the Frozen Wastes, the places like Lemuria, Umurangu, and last time we went and did these three, Umurangu, Lands of the Red Rain, Formosa Ultima, and the Invasion Isles. Today we'll continue from this area and we'll continue going south in this direction. So before we get right into it, I just want to thank you for your continued support on this series, and I will hope you continue to support me in my future episodes and videos. With that said, let's get right into it. So the first continent we will be talking about today is actually not really a continent, it's more like an island. In fact, it is so small you can barely see it in the map. This is Ohahwehwe, the psychic melting pot. This island might seem very small and irrelevant, but it is actually one of the most farther islands compared to the rest of the world in this map. In fact, it's right at the edge of the world, or well, the edge, you can debate what you can call that, but it's between the frozen wastes and the volcanic wastes, which by the way we'll be talking about in this video. This makes it very complicated as a land matter. In fact, it is very interesting when you actually get into it. All sorts of strange psychic phenomena manifest on this island. So let's talk about the first time any humans actually arrived on this island. As we've seen in previous episodes, it is not too uncommon for humans to exit the ice walls one way or another and actually arrive to the lands beyond the ice walls. And while of course they could arrive here in the first ring quite easily, the second ring is another issue. It's way harder, but sometimes, only sometimes, it does happen. And in the case of Ohahwehwe, being as far as it is, it might have been better if they didn't. So, those who arrived on this island at first didn't notice anything weird, but as they scoured for resources, they noticed something weird was happening in their psyche. Their minds were being affected by the presence on this island. What presence? Well, it wasn't a physical presence, it was more like a feeling that they could feel inside of them. Their consciousness and senses of self were starting to blend together, slowly but surely. The same was happening to their minds and their senses of conception. Everything they understood was changing, and as they continued going around in this island, they could actually see the effects on this on the local wildlife and what actually existed there. Creatures started to look one another, and plants started to all look the same, but despite looking the same, they couldn't be recognizable as any plants or animals they had seen before. Furthermore, on the 7th day from their landing, the physical forms were starting to fuse together as well. So not only on a psychic level, but on a physical level. In fact, they could see plants growing on their own skin, same as with animal parts like fur. They felt like they were being fused with the creatures and life that existed on this island. And even worse, if they touched one another between these comrades, they risked fusing one with each other. All this nonsense led to the captain of this crew declaring that to protect the lives of these people, they had to leave immediately. And although, of course, very hard to actually get to any near landmass, as you can see it is extremely isolated, and it is located in the glacial ocean, so the waters are extremely cold. Imagine like going around Greenland or something like that, and imagine just trying to get out of there if you're like dispersed in nowhere and you have to get to landmass, but there's nothing there. The closest one was one we will get to in this video, but in this case they had to reach something else. They had to reach the Thousand World Sea. So this crew finally escaped, and they managed to unfuse the parts which were fused. The things that were starting to grow in them started to fall off, and their mental capacities and psyche started to turn backwards into what it was before, and their experience on Ohahwehwe didn't change them fully, and it wasn't too relevant to their lives. But for this reason, Ohahwehwe was absolutely forbidden for any other human that could have reached it to reach it, so that's all we know about Ohahwehwe, despite the terrible things that happened when somebody reached it. My hypothesis is that if this is true, then the reason for it to be like that is because of the effect that the glacial wastes and the volcanic wastes would have once they, blend with each other and the residue arrives into the sea. I don't know about the psychic effects. I guess the fumes that arrive from this kind of waste could affect the vision and the senses of the people that reach this island. As far as the physical senses, my hypothesis is a bit lame, I guess. I think it was just an illusion of sorts, like a hallucination. They weren't actually fusing together fully, but it was more like what they were feeling they were like doing. So I don't think it would have actually become some sort of like horrible abomination of like, I don't know how many crewmates there were, but I guess like 7 people fused together. I don't think that would have happened. I think they were hallucinating strongly because of the fumes that came here. But that's where the description ends, so honestly my hypothesis or my idea is as good as any's. Anyways, the next place we will be looking today in this video is the thing I mentioned before, aka the Thousand World Sea. So I think this might be one of the biggest parts of the video because simply there is so much, like literally on the map there's so much. So the first thing we can note about this Thousand World Sea is that it's not just sea, there's stuff in it, literally. And that is the Thousand World Archipelago. Well, okay, Thousand Worlds isn't meant to be literal, there's not like 1,000 worlds here, it's not like an alternate universe kind of deal, no, it's just islands, but it's so many and so much of them that at some point you ask yourself, am I going into different worlds every time I hop from one island to another? Which I guess could make sense. If you see the other oceans that this map kind of shows, they are mostly void of any sort of islands. I mean, of course, there are some big ones, and the continents, like we've seen before. Things like Amphetamina are examples, and here, of course, there are some archipelagos that are bordering the continents, like this right here. There's a bunch of islands here. Maybe I guess this could be a good example. Abraxas, the glowing islands. I mean, that's an archipelago for you. But not to this level. There's never been, at least we've never seen an entire ocean which is literally filled to the brim with islands, and also with different vegetation. You can see these being more jungle-like, you can see these being more desert-like, these could be more Mediterranean-like. In fact, the description says that these are in fact more Mediterranean-like, and they resemble the ones inside of the Mediterranean, which is this sea right here, in between Europe, Africa, and Asia, and the islands actually appear to be, or at least the more inhabitable ones appear to be similar to Sicily or Crete. This actually has to do with who actually inhabits these islands, because in fact they are not uninhabitable, they're actually quite inhabitable, and in fact some of them, not all of them, but a portion of them is actually settled. Who settled them? Well, the answer might shock you, because literally nobody could expect this, but it's the sea people. Okay, that sounds a bit crazy, right? Sea people? Who are this? What are you talking about, sea people? Okay, if you know a bit about ancient history, you might recognize the sea people, because they're actually a very important part of where, like, the Bronze Ages in, I guess, the area that is now the Old World right here ended, and when the Iron Age started. So the Bronze Age was a period of time where civilizations started growing, especially in the Fertile Crescent right here, and in the Levant as well, Egypt, Anatolia, the modern parts of Greece, I guess Iran as well. All this area here was experiencing the start of like civilization as we know it, with places like Babylon, the Hittites, Egypt, the dynasties, etc., etc. And at some point, by the end of the like first millennium BCE or BC before Christ, what happened is that there were these people, these nomads, that arrived from nobody knows exactly where and traveled from the coasts, attacked from the ports into the lands of these states and destroyed them, burned the cultural aspects of where they hid their knowledges. They destroyed like the leaders of these civilizations, they destroyed the armies, they raided, they pillaged, and in some way they directly caused the end of the Bronze Age because they made these civilizations regress afterwards. So these same sea peoples were of course sea people for a reason. Why are they called that? Because they all came through boats and they came from the sea. The historians theorized that they were some sort of like Sardinian tribes, so from the islands of Sardinia, which was called Shardana because that's what the sea people referred to by the Egyptians. But there are other theories explaining that they are Greeks of some unknown sort, or maybe they didn't even come from this area of the world. And in the case of the land beyond the ice walls, the theory is that after the Bronze Age happened, so after this collapse was caused by them, they had to find new homes. And it's not too impossible for them to have settled somewhere else because we do know, and this is a little fun fact for those that don't know, but the word for the region, and I can't actually say the region itself, but the word for the region that is right here, which is not the other word. Okay, how can I explain this without getting my channel banned or something? Okay, there's two entities here currently, and they're at war with each other, and I'm not gonna say who is at war with who, but because I can't say the names, but the one that is the Arab entity, I'm just gonna say it like that, the word for those actually come from the Philistines and the term Palestine, and those were actually descendant of the sea people which settled the area during the end of the Bronze Age. So I hope you understood what I meant without having to explicitly say the words, because otherwise, once again, YouTube will not like that, because they like to censor everything. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. So they have settled areas where they plundered, basically. So it's not too impossible for them if they actually escaped from the ice walls and reached some other parts of the world and reached all the way to the World Sea to have settled these islands, especially since, as you can see by this equator, or at least you could call it an equator, these lines, these red lines, are supposed to be the equators of the outer rings. So imagine this being somewhere of like where like jungle would be, and this is the desert, and so this island, this area right here, could have a sort of Mediterranean climate, which would be perfect for them to settle in. Hence why they settled these islands and started creating outposts on them where they could trade within each other. So the people that came to Ikyosa were probably the descendants of these sea peoples, which the names of which I am not really sure of. But an interesting fact at these sea peoples and the people that colonized, I guess you could say, the Thousand World Sea are actually in part Neanderthals. In fact, parts of their DNA corresponds to the descendants of the Neanderthal humans, or I guess the hominids, that came before the Homo sapiens in Europe and Asia. Anyways, going back to the geography of the Thousand World Sea, the islands themselves are roughly all the sizes. Well, of course, the sizes change. I guess this one could be the size of Cuba, while the majority of them I saw and I compared them to the islands inside of the ice walls, and they seem to be mostly of the size of the island of Jamaica, which is roughly south of Cuba and next to Mexico. And so it's not very large islands, so you can't expect like a large threatening civilization empire to rise from here, but it's still interesting. And one thing I want to say about the sea itself, since we talked about the archipelago alone, is that the sea actually holds in it a lot of life, and this life is of course filled with terrible sea creatures that we can imagine, but one of these specifically, and I guess the most egregious, could be the Leviathan. The Leviathan, which also has been named and recognized as a creature in the Bible, I guess the terror of the sea, one could say, one of the biggest sea creatures that is the length of 300 meters, so several feet, like literally a lot of them. I don't know, I can't remember the translation between feet and centimeters or meters right now, but it's a lot, trust me, it's like very large. We're talking 800 feet, maybe more. it's a lot. That's what I'm gonna say. And this creature, which once again mentioned in the Bible, is basically the cousin or the sister species to the one that actually exists inside of the ice walls and between the ice walls and the first ring, which is why this area right here on the map is called the Leviathan's Gate. We've actually talked about the Leviathan's Gate in a previous video when we were doing the first series. We were described why the Leviathans were actually there, and this type of Leviathan is different from the one of the World Sea, because the one of the World Sea is basically a free species. It just roams around the islands and I guess lives off the wildlife that inhabits those oceans, while the Leviathan's Gate actually is guarded by these Leviathans. So there are some sort of insurance for those that I guess control these gates to not let the people that are inside of the ice walls escape outside of them. Or I guess you could say that, or maybe they're peaceful, I don't know. I mean, they could be whales for all I know, honestly. But I mean, whales don't really grow that large. 300 meters is a bit too much, don't you think? Once again, several feet. I don't really know how much, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Anyways, so that is it when it comes to the Thousand World Sea. But before we end with this part of the map, I want to say one interesting fact about what actually caused such a disparate and long archipelago to form. These are actually the remains of the moon that impacted and fell into what now is Formosa Ultima, land of the broken moon. We explained this in the last video. Basically, this is supposed to be like a landmass created when one of the old moons of Earth, I guess, Theia, or I guess it was another plane of existence that fell into Earth, and it caused a huge explosion. It was at the start of the formation of this plane of existence, but the end bit is basically that this continent, Formosa Ultima, was the main part of what remained of that Theia thing that fell into it. And these parts we're seeing right here, which make up the landmasses of the Thousand World Sea, are actually the scattered remains of the asteroids that came with it. Hence why it is so far going and starts all the way up here and ends here. If you actually take this area and compare it to here, we're talking about the size from Australia all the way to South Africa, this amount. So it's not irrelevant, it's quite big, hence why this was made like this. Next we're gonna talk about Eden, the primordial garden. So I know a lot of you have been waiting for it. I've been mentioning the fact that this was on this map for a long time. I think at first I mentioned it in the first episode of MO, I was scouring between the continents. I was just zooming in, zooming out, seeing what was on this map, and I catched an eye on Eden and already saw that must have been something interesting, and I've mentioned it at least in the last 2 episodes that eventually we would get to it, and it's finally time, fellas. It is finally time to talk about Eden, the primordial garden. So obviously this is hypothesized to be where the actual thing is. So for those that don't know, but I guess everybody should know, but some might not know that Eden is the Garden of Heaven, aka the terrestrial paradise, aka the place where Adam and Eve were made into, and of course the first birthplace of humanity according to the Bible. When humanity was created by God, Adam and Eve were the first 2 specimens of humanity, and they were put not somewhere random on Earth, but they were put in a specific place, aka the Garden of Eden, which was supposed to be the perfect place for humans to live in. Endlessly fertile, would just give them resources, would let them live in eternal peace, they wouldn't have to work, everything was good, there were no illnesses, and so on and so on. So of course this is a map, this is the Garden of Eden. You can interpret it on a religious sense and say, okay, outside of these walls, that's where Eden is. The way I see it, it's more of a coincidence. Okay, is this really the Garden of Eden, the whole thing, or is this a place that is so good that it is called the Garden of Eden? So before we actually get into what this specific continent does and what the properties of this continent are, we have to talk about a bit of how and why people in history have been trying to find the Garden of Eden. So for those that do not know, the Garden of Eden has actually been hypothesized to exist inside of the ice walls in multiple locations throughout history. Some of the first examples of these were in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates River, so the area around here. This is for the reason that in the Bible, in the passages, it is mentioned that the, literally the place of birth of Adam and Eve, aka Eden, is in a region that is the source of 4 tributaries of rivers. And 2 of these are actually specifically mentioned, and they are the Tigris and Euphrates River. The Tigris and Euphrates River, I'm not going to be perfect in drawing this, but they're something like this on this map, okay? That's where they are. And because of this, people were saying, okay, Eden has to be somewhere here, in what at that time was called Babylon, Babylonia, or Assyria in this northern part, in this southern part, Sumeria, so very ancient names. It's where modern-day Iraq is, in case you need to have like a more contemporary view of it. So Iraq is where Eden was originally thought to be. But if you think about it more, then it says a source of 4 tributaries, so I guess you would have to count these 2 rivers as well. I think that's where they go. And that's where in the ancient times, where Armenia used to be. So for a long time, people thought that the Garden of Eden were somewhere in the mountains of Armenia, hence why it was like very hard to find, because it was covered between the mountains, it was hidden. There were other theories as well. In fact, there were theories that said it was in the Persian Gulf, so somewhere right here, so it was that at the mouth of these rivers. Other theories included the area that is now the Lebanon, which the Phoenicians, which were the original inhabitants of this area, called Phoenicia, so they said that this was the area what the Garden of Eden was at. As you can see, they're all places very near to where the ancient kingdom of David or Judas was, where of course the Bible was kind of like written in, so that makes sense. But there were actually like more wild theories. In fact, for example, since it was very famous to like go search for the Garden of Eden in the Middle Ages, at the end of the Middle Ages, when our guy Christopher Columbus from Genoa into Spain traveled all the way, I mean, why am I saying our guy? I don't know, I'm not associating with the dude, I'm just saying that's who did this, right? When he went, I'm sorry, I had to specify. When he went from the Iberian Peninsula, I don't remember exactly what route he take, I think it was something like this, and he went to Hispaniola, this island right here. He thought that he arrived in the Garden of Eden. He thought that the entirety New World was the Garden of Eden. So not only just Hispaniola, the islands where the Dominican Republic and Haiti are, but the entirety of the New World for him was the Garden of Eden. And last but not least, the Mormon interpretation, the Mormons being a religious group, a stemma from Christianity, I guess, that exists mainly in the United States, mainly in the state of Utah, around this area right here. And their interpretation of what the Garden of Eden was supposed to be in is Missouri, or at least where the Mississippi River ends, somewhere around here, I think, because there's like multiple rivers coming from here, multiple tributaries. So as you can see in history, there's been multiple theories of where the Garden of Eden might actually be in. And in this map, the resolution to this, the solution that it gives, is that it's not behind the ice walls. It's beyond the ice walls, and it's not in the first ring, hence why it's been even harder to find. It's actually after the mountain ring, after Shangri-La. It's between the Ouroboros Sea and the Glacial Ocean, even further around the equator in the second ring. It's right here, Eden, the primordial garden. And the description of this continent actually is scientific in a sense. It is said that Eden has a power of spontaneous generation of new life forms, which can include hominids of sorts, so like, humans, but can also include any sort of like life form, hence animals, plants, and so on and so forth, but also resources of any kind. And the Garden of Eden would be situated right here, where these 4 rivers come from. And if you see all those representation of the Garden of Eden in history, you can see that mostly it's been painted as having a lake either behind the characters shown in the paintings or near it, of course because of fertility. But if we're going based on like simply, the map looking in a simple way, I guess this is really where the Garden of Eden would be in this map. So the question is, how realistic is this? Can the Garden of Eden really exist outside of the ice walls in this area, in this map? It's up to you to decide. But it's definitely been an interesting read because, the whole spontaneous generation of new life forms, and the fact that somewhere here there should be the tree of life and knowledge, the one that Eve famously got the apple from, would mean that any man that actually reaches this continent, any man or woman that reaches this continent, could achieve infinite knowledge. But then wouldn't he be or she be repeating exactly what happened in the Bible? And God would not be happy about that. I'll leave you with that when it comes to the Eden. The last thing we'll be looking at in this video is the last of the wastelands we have to talk about. Actually, is it? I mean, I think so. Actually, you know what? I don't think I actually did these two, so we'll wait for those. But this is definitely one of the last ones. It's the volcanic wastes, or volcanic wastes, I guess. So at first look, I thought these were just like all other wastes. So literally just a big landmass of volcanic activity with volcanoes exploding all the time. But then I looked at the map a bit closer, and it appears to be that there's like borders between islands and such in this area. So my interpretation of the volcanic wastes is that this area right here in dark red, like brownish color, is the equivalent of like literally volcanoes upon volcanoes upon volcanoes. So it's literally filled with volcanoes. The red part is like oceans of lava, like these ones right here, especially these ones, but all of these are just craters and like multiple craters that mix with each other, creating like these little seas of lava, lakes of lava. And finally, there's this area which is actually a sort of sea that is filled with all the lava flow coming from these lakes, coming from these volcanoes, but despite being terrible, it is not completely uninhabitable, or rather, of course it is uninhabitable for humans and any sort of like carbon-based life forms, but I've seen a hypothesis, a question I guess, that says that maybe in these oceans, so not on the volcanoes themselves or in the lakes of lava, but in the oceans, there might be silicon-based life forms, which is a concept that has been hypothesized multiple times in science fiction or in general science when it comes to looking at the worlds that could exist above ours. And one of these hypotheses is that since carbon-based life form is so hard to actually get without the specific requirements, then silicon, which is a way more resisting material, could actually support life in specific forms. This could be, of course, only in the oceans, so it wouldn't be on land. And an interesting thing that I looked up myself to see if this could actually be possible is that silicon does melt at 1400 degrees Celsius, while lava is only on average 1200 degrees Celsius. So I guess, you know, it's possible. It's possible. I'm not saying it is the case, but it's possible. That said, that's where I'll end this video, guys. We did the entirety of Ohahwehwe, the Thousand World Sea, Eden, and the volcanic wastes. And tomorrow, for you guys, I guess maybe it's already today, but for me it's tomorrow, is New Year's. So today's New Year's Eve. Tomorrow's the first day of 2025. So I'm hoping all of you guys have a wonderful New Year's Eve, or had a wonderful New Year's Eve, depending on when you're watching this video, and that 2025 will be a better year for all of us, and we'll all have a better life coming next year. Thank you for watching. Keep supporting the channel. Subscribe if you haven't. Like the video and comment. Ask whatever you want to ask. And let's see each other next time. Thanks for watching.